Hello and welcome, I'm Ken Gowdy from Sax Comprehensive, and in this video we will look at tonguing. Now there are basically two ways to start and stop a note, and if you're a beginner you'll probably use the first method of using a breath attack. So here what you're going to do is to blow into the saxophone with enough force to cause the reed to vibrate and create a sound, and then you're going to play a few notes, and then to stop the sound you're basically going to stop blowing into the saxophone. Now this way is fine as a beginner, but as you develop, you're going to want to learn how to tongue a note using your tongue, because this will give you a nice clean start to the note and a nice clean ending to the note. Now there are various ways how you can position your tongue and move your tongue in order to tongue a note using your tongue. And which technique and which method and where you place your tongue and how you move your tongue will depend on various factors. One reason may be depending on how you've actually been taught. If you're taught a certain way to tongue a note, then you'll probably keep that method unless something happens and you have to change that method. Maybe it's due to the size of your tongue. We all have different sized mouths, we all have different sized tongues, we all use different sized mouthpieces, we all place the mouthpiece in our mouths in different positions. And therefore having a longer tongue or a smaller tongue will favour certain methods above other methods. So what I'm going to do is to show you 3 ways to tongue a note, 3 ways to position and move your tongue in order to tongue a note, which is usually used. Some people tongue the note with the tip of their tongue just under the tip of the reed. Here the action is mainly from the tip of the tongue, so the rest of the tongue is stationary. So to start the note, you place the tip of your tongue just under the tip of the reed so it cannot vibrate. Make sure that it's near the tip of the reed so that no squeaks are produced. Then you start blowing to build up some air pressure. Then you release the tip of your tongue, which will cause the reed to start to vibrate immediately and create the sound. Then to stop the note, you place the tip of your tongue back on the reed in the same position, which will stop the reed from vibrating and stop the sound. It is argued by those that use this method that using only the tip of your tongue will help when playing notes faster. Also, because it's just the tip that is mainly moving, you are not changing your oral cavity a lot, so the space within your mouth remains virtually the same, and therefore you are not changing the dynamics of the sound. Also, since you are only using the tip of your tongue, this creates a cleaner start and stop to the notes so that the notes do not sound muffled. Notice that the airflow is constantly flowing through the saxophone, and the use of the tongue is merely to stop the reed vibrating rather than to stop the airflow. When playing a succession of tongued notes, the tongue should quickly and lightly touch the reed. This is the best way to get the same consistency between the notes. Some people may close off the mouthpiece when they tongue a note. This will stop the airflow. This would have the effect of creating a strongly tongued note which you will hear as opposed to lightly touching the reed. Others will lightly touch the reed in such a way so that the reed still vibrates but the sound is dampened when tonguing between notes. You would have to experiment with how much pressure you want to apply to the reed when you tongue. Whether you want to close off the mouthpiece and stop the airflow, or touch the reed to stop it vibrating while keeping the airflow, which is better, or to lightly touch the reed so that the reed still vibrates but the sound is dampened just before playing the next note. But remember, the whole point of tonguing is to stop the sound, not necessarily the airflow. Another way of tonguing a note is to position the tip of the tongue down by the teeth and to raise the tongue so somewhere further back on the tongue touches the tip of the reed. So again, here you start with the tongue touching the tip of the reed so that it will not vibrate. Then you build up the air pressure by blowing, and when ready, you lower your tongue so that the reed will start vibrating. To stop the reed again, you raise your tongue until it touches the reed again and stops it vibrating. Another way of tonguing is to do the same as just mentioned, but this time the tip of the tongue is anchored somewhere at the base of the teeth and stays there. This will be difficult to do by those who have short tongues. So that was a few ways of tonguing used by musicians, and each will have their own advantages and disadvantages. When playing a melody, you would usually tongue notes at various places within the melody, which will give a certain feel to the music. In sheet music, slur marks are written to give an indication where to tongue the notes. Here is an extract of Charlie Parker's Cherokee. If you play it as it is shown, it wouldn't really sound like Charlie Parker because you wouldn't know where to tongue the notes, and therefore you wouldn't have the same feel as when Charlie Parker plays. If I add the articulation marks, you will see that some notes are played louder than others. The curved lines are called slur markings to show when notes are played smoothly together or legato. You would tongue the note at the beginning of the slur mark to get a clean start to the note. Then you would play the following notes under the slur mark with the same breath. Then finally end the last note by placing your tongue back on the reed again. If the notes do not have a slur mark over them, then they should be played as individual tongued notes. When notes follow each other without a slur mark and without spaces between them, then you should lightly tongue the notes so that there is as little interruption of the airflow between the notes. One way to do this is to use syllables. So when you tongue the note, you pronounce these syllables, or you put your tongue in a position as if you were speaking these syllables. Now these syllables could be anything from, say, ta, la, pa, ma, na. When you use these different syllables, it will give a slightly different tonguing effect. Some of these syllables will produce a harsh tonguing effect, while some other syllables will have a less harsh effect. So for instance, if you were to tongue a note and use the syllable ta, 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 that will give you a strong tonguing effect, whereas people use the syllable na to give a softer tonguing effect and to use it to tongue notes at a quicker pace. Now everybody will pronounce syllables differently, but when I pronounce syllables, when I say ta, there is a strong connection with my tongue and the roof of my mouth. I feel my tongue digging into the roof of my mouth. Whereas if I use the syllable na, then there's a less strong connection. The tongue hardly touches the roof of my mouth. Sometimes it doesn't even touch the roof of my mouth, and my tongue is not so curved. So when tonguing the note and using these syllables with the reed, your tongue will either aggressively touch the reed or less aggressively touch the reed, and as a result will give slightly different variations on the tonguing effects. Now there are various other methods of tonguing a note, usually used for playing at speed or for adding some form of effect, and these methods will be known by various different names by different musicians. I will just go through some of them. One of the techniques of tonguing is called flutter tonguing, whereby you flutter your tongue. So if you imagine pronouncing the letter R as in Spanish, where you roll your tongue, now if you blow a note while fluttering your tongue, you will get a type of growling effect. Now if you want to see that demonstrated, I have done a video on how to growl. It is actually demonstrated in that video. Another form of tonguing is called what some musicians call ramming, where you slap your tongue onto the reed to give a slapping effect. Another form of tonguing is called slap tonguing. Now there are various ways to slap tongue a note, but usually if this is the reed and this is your tongue, you place your tongue onto the reed and you curve your tongue so that it creates a suction between your tongue and the reed, so that when you pull your tongue away, it actually pulls the reed away from the mouthpiece. And when the reed is pulled away from the mouthpiece and slaps back onto the mouthpiece, you get that slapping effect. It's a bit difficult to do, and there are various ways to do it, but I have done a video on how to slap tongue, and if you watch that, that might give you a better understanding of it. Another form of tonguing is called half tonguing. It also goes by various other names such as ghosting. I have done a video on ghosting notes. So basically what you do here is when you tongue the note, you lightly touch the reed with your tongue in such a way that the reed continues to vibrate. But you blow a note and you hold that note with your tongue still on the reed, but your reed is vibrating. And what that does, it gives a dampened or quieter sound to the note, which various musicians use to give an effect. Also, you can play notes at a normal airflow and then play quieter notes without having to reduce the airflow, because you are making the notes quieter by using this tonguing effect. Some people will put their tongue on the corner of the reed to create this half tonguing effect. So like I said before, I have done a video on ghost tonguing, and that is in there, though I'm calling it ghost tonguing, but it does go by various other names such as half tonguing. Another form of tonguing is double tonguing and triple tonguing. Now here you use syllables, just like I said before at the beginning of this video. You can use syllables to give a tonguing effect. This is what happens when you do double tonguing or triple tonguing. So in the case of double tonguing, you use two syllables. Usually you use something such as ta-ka, so taka 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 taka, or daga, daga 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 daga. And you use these two syllables to produce two kind of separate notes or two separate sounds. So the second syllable is a guttural sound, so it's created at the back of your throat, and it interrupts the airflow when you pronounce those syllables. So when you say ka, ka, it interrupts the sound at the back of your throat, or when you say ga, ga, it interrupts the sound at the back of your throat. So what you do, you tongue the first syllable as usual. So you usually tongue the note. So you touch the tongue onto the reed to create that first syllable, ta or da. But then when you do the second syllable, you do not touch the reed with your tongue. You pronounce the syllable at the back of your throat, and that interrupts that sound. So it's as if you tongue the note, but obviously you're not tonguing the note with your tongue. You're actually creating the sound or the start of the sound when you pronounce the syllable. Taka, daga, taka, 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 daga, 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 daga. And you do the same thing when you do it as a triple tonguing, if that makes sense. Well, lastly, let me say thank you for watching this video, and hopefully it was helpful and informative. And if it was, then give a like as usual and share with your friends. And if you're not yet a subscriber, then consider subscribing to this channel. And let us know in the comments, how do you actually tongue a note? Do you tongue the note in such a way that you close off the mouthpiece so that the airflow stops, so the sound stops and the airflow stops? Or do you tongue a note whereby you lightly touch the reed so that the sound stops, but the air continues to flow through the mouthpiece? Let us know. This is one of the questions that beginners usually ask. Let us know how you tongue a note in the comments. And I shall see you soon. Stay safe. Bye-bye.